Hello, Garland Nixon here. We're hanging out with activist and journalist and Substack guy and all around smart guy, Max Reed. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here. We're hanging out with Mark Reed and Max Reed. We're going to talk about what's happening with Venezuela before we get going. Just so you know, Max, you can always count on the liberals, but when you need them, to stand up for, wait a minute, the New York Times, the case for overthrowing Maduro. That's right. You can always count on the liberals. Whenever there's a war to be started or some oil to be stolen, you can always count. I thought they hated Trump. Now all of a sudden they're like, well, since he's doing a regime change war to steal the oil against a socialist country, hey, he's our guy. At any rate, let's get started on your thoughts on, what do you think regarding the another oil theft war? What do you think is the first issue that comes to mind of the stuff that you've been working on?
Well, I titled a Substack article about this, and my opening line in that Substack article is welcome, say hello to the new boss, same as the old boss, and it's just a continuation, no matter what, as Jimmy Dore says, no matter who you vote for in this country, you vote for another John McCain. So this is just kind of business as usual. George W. Bush did this with his attack on Iraq and his illegal invasion of Iraq. We looted the oil there. We destroyed Iraq. We wiped it off the international market. All sorts of things. Under Obama, we did the same thing with Libya. We then occupied northern Syria and used proxies to loot oil from northern Syria. And we're still doing that. We're still in Syria, of course. And now we're going to turn, since we don't know where to go next, we might as well turn to our hemisphere. So it looks like Trump, the neocons, the Miami Cuban mafia, all the salty exiles, and all the fifth columnists in Venezuela are going to get their chance to destroy another country.
Well, Marco Rubio, and a lot of people have talked about it, and now people are starting to call him Narco Rubio. I know you've been looking into a little bit of his, shall we say, shady past. Apparently he's got a history, a sordid history when it comes to drug trafficking from Central and South America.
Yeah, no, you really can't make this up. When I think of Miami, the first thing that comes to my head, apart from the music, culture, beautiful women, is Scarface. It's the Latin American capital, and it is notorious, and it has been notorious for the drug trade down there. I mean, going back to when the Italian mafia was more prominent there, they were also prominent in Havana before they got kicked out by Castro in the revolution. Miami is just an epicenter of drugs, and Marco Rubio had a brother-in-law that married his sister called Orlando Sicilia. Now, Sicilia is an interesting guy. Now he's a real estate mogul, as many are in the very hot temperature of Florida. But before that, in the 80s, he was a Tony Montana tier drug pusher. He was a very key and a multimillionaire, and was knee deep in the cocaine trade in Miami in the 1980s. And he actually got arrested for it in the 80s. And Little Marco, as our current president once referred to him in, I believe, 2015, the Republican primary, he lived with him for, I believe, a month or two in a spare bedroom. And if you look at the court case that came out against Orlando Sicilia in the 80s, where did he keep the cocaine? In a spare bedroom. Now, of course, Marco Rubio at the time was 15, 16. He was a teenager. But I don't know. Garland, have you ever lived in a house for a month on end and, not noticed something like the white powder that, maybe all around you?
You thought it was pillows. That's what it was. No, you thought it was huge kilo-shaped pillows.
His brother-in-law kilos of down feathers. He needs the sugar for his beautiful coffee. It's great.
I taught classes on, interestingly enough, two things. I taught classes on organized crime, at a community college level. And one of the things I used to show was the Cocaine Cowboys. You ever see that? Everybody should watch the Cocaine Cowboys. It's a couple of different. I think that maybe the History Channel did it, but there's a couple of different episodes. It is really friggin' good. Really gets in deep into the whole cocaine thing. Additionally, very interesting. So at one point in my law enforcement career, I was a law enforcement official working under the governor's office. I would go around to different states, to different police departments, and kind of like supervise their, not supervise, but go through their promotional process and help them make changes or adjustments in policy. Okay. And one of the places I did it was Miami. And I had a friend so I had a buddy down there that would tell me I'd go down there. I went on ride-alongs and everything and learned all about it. And he told me, he said, yeah, I was here in the 80s when I started. And he said, when you pulled up to the police department where, all the officers parked their cars, Maseratis, Ferraris, Porsches, custom Porsches, everything. He says everybody was on the take and everybody knew it. And he said, and what I found out was that then the entire like skyline of Miami, all built with cocaine money.
Yeah.
Everybody went into like the Mercedes dealerships and everybody had checks. And every check that they wrote was from the Bank of Panama.
Oh.
And everything was built, bought. And of course, if you're the Mercedes dealer and some guy walks up and says, I want 5 Mercedes, you're selling Mercedes. Everybody
got the money.
That's the game all day long. You know what I mean? Everybody that walks in there, what do you got? Another check from the Bank of Panama. There you go. And that was, so if his brother was there at that time and he was making money, he was a cocaine dealer. Everybody was, that's what it was. That was the economy of South Florida. So here's my point. Even at whatever age you were, you're 14, there's no way you didn't know, because he probably had machine guns in there. He had people coming in and out from various countries, hauling big bags of this or that. I'm not saying that he's guilty, but for him to pretend now like he's fighting against the drug trade, oh, that is just preposterous.
Yeah, it's really funny. Because like when I'm thinking of this, like, a bunch of bags of cocaine in the spare bedroom. It's a scene out of Scarface. Like, in I'm more of a Scarface and Miami Vice kind of guy in terms of my Miami shows. But, it's just wild that this very prominent and potentially, oh God, it's a nightmare to think about. He could be the next president. I mean, he already is, the Secretary of State, and he's indicated and sent signals that he's going to run in 2028. This future potential president, has a very interesting past, so to speak. And all of his, war on drugs, we're hard on drugs. We don't like these Venezuelan and Cuban drug dealers. That came out of nowhere. He threw the Cuban part in. And they want to do this crazy regime change war in Venezuela to get the cocaine and the drugs. Well, if you know anything about Latin America, you'll know that most of the drugs, including fentanyl and cocaine, they don't come from out of Venezuela. They come out of Colombia. They come out of Panama. They come out of these transportation areas, these hubs, these major port areas that facilitate the trade. And they come out of there. They fly in on planes to islands, and then they fly into the Everglades. They probably just get shipped into Miami. With the amount of corruption we have these days and the state of this country, it gets shipped in.
It's not hard. You got a lot of people that go out of South Florida deep sea fishing for, so let's face it, people are going out deep sea fishing in boats every day. Out of Miami, you can go down there and you can charter, it costs a few thousand if you can afford it. A boat, you go out there, I know one guy, a friend of mine, goes on this boat and it goes out for 5 days. It costs like, I don't know what it was now. It was $2,500 for fishing. It goes out like 3 to 5 days, and it's a big boat, but it goes way out in the ocean, right? And you're a diehard fisherman. You spend like $2,000-$3,000, right? And you go out on this boat and you fish for 5 days and catch all this fish and have fun and come back. How hard is it to meet somebody out while you're out there? They throw a bunch of bales of cocaine. You can fake like you're a fishing boat. So the reality is it's absurd to argue we're going to the coast of Venezuela to stop drug dealing. This is the war on terror too. The war on terror was we come up with a premise. The premise is we're fighting terrorism, and we use that to overthrow a bunch of countries and steal their oil and stuff like that. And now it's like, okay, well, what can we use for South America? Bananas, that's not illegal. Coffee, that'll never work. Drugs, that's it.
It's the only thing that will work these days. I mean, you know, the American people are done in both part, not just both parties, but especially independents. People are just done with these endless foreign adventures. People were dissatisfied with Iraq when that was going on. They had to work even at the height of their justification for the Iraq War and going after those WMDs, you know, and Saddam and all that stuff. They only got it to like, I think 51%, like a very, very, very small majority of Americans, you know, fed the slop that the media, Dick Cheney and these New York Times journalists were feeding them. And I don't think it's going to work this time either. I mean, the economic conditions are already pretty bad. Gas is going through the roof. Trump hasn't improved anything since like Biden. And the U.S. military is just extrajudicially killing people in Latin America, completely in violation of not just international law, but our own military regulations. I mean, I've heard stories, you know, I'm based in the DC area. I've heard stories of people like having to like call up law centers that provide legal counseling for, you know, U.S. armed forces. And these law centers can't pick up because there's too many people calling them because, you know, the Trump administration is launching hellfires, drones, and all sorts of things at these fishing boats, but we haven't ID'd them. No one knows who these people are. And even if they are drug dealers, you can't just extrajudicially blow up a boat that's in complete violation of any semblance of law. And it just kind of shows the desperation and the frank weakness of the U.S. empire at this point. If we remember what happened between Israel and Iran back in, I believe, July, where the U.S. pretended sugar-coated in front of Iran and pretended to negotiate. They sent out Witkoff like they always do. And they said, hey, we can get a beautiful deal. It's going to be beautiful. And they tricked them. The Iranians came to the negotiation and came back, and there was going to be more negotiations. And then all of a sudden, pagers start blowing up. Drones start getting launched into apartments in Tehran. The air defense system of Tehran gets under attack. And the Israeli fighters shoot missiles hovering over Azerbaijan into Iran. And Iran and Israel have a shooting war, except Iran doesn't bend over. Iran doesn't kneel over and die. The regime collapse doesn't happen. Generals get killed. Air defense systems get killed. The nuclear program, or at least where, you know, it was allegedly housed, if they didn't evacuate everything, which they probably did.
Yeah.
Sure, that gets knocked out. But, you know, Israel, meanwhile, gets shattered. Tel Aviv, you know, it's like a missile raining down every day on Tel Aviv. And Israel calls uncle. And the U.S. goes along with it because they don't want a full war in the Middle East, because we have too many bases that are sitting ducks in the Middle East, in Qatar and Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, Israel. So I think that it's really, especially with the drone strikes on these fishing boats, it really shows weakness and a sense of the U.S. military and the U.S. empire really can't afford another large-scale war without serious collapse in the imperial core.
I think you're right. And it's like the guy that goes in the bar and he knows he can't beat anybody up. So he picks the littlest guy he can find and says, well, I'll just push him around and that'll make you look big, because they basically tapped out when it came to Iran. You know, basically Israel called the U.S. and said, get me the hell out of this mess. I'm getting killed, I'm getting creamed here.
Mommy, I'm scared.
Yeah. And the U.S. basically called Iran and said, hey, I got an idea. Let's dance. I'll pretend to bomb your site. You pretend to throw missiles at me, and we'll say we fought it out. And Iran was like, okay, what the Iranians didn't even turn on their air defense system. And the U.S. like flew over, dropped some bombs in an area that they had told that the Iranians, like they had pictures of trucks loading up, moving everything away. You know, and they're like, okay, everything's gone now. Fly over and drop your bombs. Bloop. And then they threw some missiles at Qatar. And Trump said, yeah, it was terrible. It was, you know, blah, 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 but we won. And then so it's over. And I'm like, I think everybody knows what you just did. You know, come on, we're looking at you here, buddy. But now they're like, well, and Iran is supposedly rearming with Russians and Chinese stuff. And they're like, man, we better not take another swipe at these guys. They pounded the crap out of us last time. Maybe Venezuela. But here's the thing, too. And I always talk about this book right here.
There you
go.
You
familiar with it? People's War, People's Army. And that is General Giap. And all of my people who on this channel know about it because I talk about it. It was an interesting book about how they defeated the French. And it's how poor countries can defeat imperial powers if they just stick together, if they have a good, just cause, if they don't just go fight them on a big front. If they hit them wherever they can hit them, he has a plan, exactly how he's a diabolical plan of how you defeat the US or whoever, and it worked, right? And I look at Venezuela and I'm like, man, you can stand back and throw some long-range missiles at them. Fair enough. Sooner or later, you got to put people in. 16,000 troops are not going to get it done. They have armed the people, and I've been there and talked to them, and they'll tell you, we will defend our revolution. They're ready to fight. You go in there, the 16,000 troops, they ain't none of them coming out alive. Everybody will shoot at you. The men, the women, they armed their people. It's a revolutionary, the Bolivarian revolution. They are ready for, the term, armed struggle. Yep. And they mean business. So even then, you can stand back and throw some missiles. If you go in there, you don't want to send soldiers in there. That's all I'm saying. They ain't coming out.
Yeah, no, and especially with Venezuela, it's such like out of all the countries to like, this isn't Panama, this isn't Grenada from the 1980s, which they didn't even have militaries. Those were just muggings. Right. Like whenever I meet anyone who is rah about Reagan and Panama and Grenada, it's like, wow, the 300-pound man managed to, beat up like a 5-year-old child. Like, it's not impressive. But no, Venezuela, let's assume even the best case scenario. Let's say these maniacs in DC and their stooges, they managed to somehow magically take out Maduro, take out his senior leadership, and they sow enough chaos at the top level. Even still, there's 3 million. They've passed out, I believe, 3 million rifles. The Bolivarian militia is huge. And it's not just the Bolivarian militia. The Bolivarian revolution isn't just the ruling party, the Partido Socialista Unidad, the Socialist Unity Party of Venezuela. It's a ton of other parties. You have the Tupac Amaru groups, which are like, if you think the Socialist Party is radical, you better check your coat with those guys. So even if they manage to go into Caracas, they install Machado, that crazy Nobel Peace Prize vampire that they want to install and have privatize the resources, loot them. They're not going to get the resources because there's going to be guerrillas everywhere blowing it up. There's going to be guerrillas ambushing you in the jungles. It's going to be a nightmare. You'll barely even control the cities. There'll be strikes everywhere in the cities. The electrical system will be gone. All the infrastructure will be gone. And it's going to be, even if you destroy the Socialist Party in Venezuela and the Bolivarian government, all that's going to happen is that the movement's going to reform out in the countryside, in these villages that, this revolution brought electricity, water, literacy to. They healed a lot of people. They sent Cuba sent a ton of doctors to Venezuela to help out with their medical system. And those people, the indigenous people, everyone in Venezuela is going to, it's going to be open hunting season on the Yankees who go in there and their proxies. And it's not going to work out, even if they manage to kill Maduro and get rid of the government.
And you ain't destroying that party because it's 63% of the country.
Yeah, you're not destroying that coalition.
And they're ready to fight. Yeah. And as you said, the other party, who's a communist party, they're about 10%. And they to them, the problem with the socialists is they're too soft. They're too easygoing. Yeah. What's wrong with you? Armed struggle, man. That's what we live for. So you get in there, man. That's a fight you don't want. And I would not want to have to go anywhere in Caracas and fight. Have you been in Caracas?
I've seen photos of it. It's a very dense urban area.
It's in a city. It's mountains. You're in a city and roads going up like this, like that. It is in the mountains, a city that is a mountainous city, mountains all around it. Everywhere you go on those roads, all people have to do is sit up on the edge of where some building somewhere, and you're just in a kill zone after kill zone after kill zone. And the whole city's going to be armed. And you're just, you don't live a day. You don't live a day because there's going to be everywhere. There's people with small arms waiting to fire on you with machine guns or what have you. Literally the entire city's armed. What are you going to do? Yeah, where are you going to go in that city? You're going to get cut to ribbons. Then you go after the mountains. Same thing. Everybody's armed, and you're driving those roads. You're driving through the mountains, right? And let's say you're going up a mountain. You look up the mountain, and there's a big village with houses and stuff everywhere. And you go over that, and you come down, and there's village with houses, and they're sitting up there. When you start coming up that hill, they're going to cut you to shreds. When you go over and go down the next one, there's another village. They're going to cut you to shreds. Oh, by the way, they're going to be in the jungles because there's jungle on either side hanging over the road. They're waiting. They're ambushing. Don't even think about going out there in the dark. Yeah. So if you go in that tent, it is a gigantic ambush spot. the entire country. To go in there, the oil fields, whatever, to go in there, you're going to get ambushed nonstop. It's just, there's no way you survive with people who have been ready for this for years, and they're not going to be happy. So to go in there would be a suicide mission for U.S. military. 16,000 soldiers. That's the other thing. The U.S. military, they don't have the land army to do this. And this is not Rome. We don't have a land army. All we got is some planes and some boats, and we can't go after Russia or China with that because they'll blow them all out of the water with missiles. So the only thing we can do is maybe find a country that hopefully doesn't have missiles far enough to hit us and stay way back and shoot at them or something. You try to come to shore, you're not making it up there to the shore alive. Would you want to do an amphibious landing on a bunch of on a jungle-filled shore?
It's not going to be Normandy, I'll tell you that much. And even at Normandy, it was a nightmare. You had the giant pillboxes and German machine guns that were shooting down at you. You had mortars, you had artillery. Now we have these beautiful things called FPV drones. Can you imagine doing a naval landing, an amphibious landing on a beach with the current war conditions that we're in with FPV drones, where, you know, say you're in a squad and you're coming up in your amphibious track vehicle, boom, your amphibious vehicle gets hit from the top with an FPV drone. 3 of you guys are down. You get out of there. You start taking small arms fire from, you know, the people who are dug in on the shore of the beach. Boom, your buddy's dead. You know, it's just an utter nightmare. And the U.S.
See, they're not dug in. They're not dug in on the beach. You know why? Because when you come up to the shoreline, it's mountains coming down there. They're in the hills. You're coming in on a lowland, and there's mountains and jungles, mountains covered with jungles all around you. So when you come in, they just sit there and wait for you to get on shore and get set up and get yourself together. And they just tear you to shreds. I wouldn't wish that on a dog, a military person, to have to go into that country. Vietnam, it's Vietnam, but it's 3 times the size of Vietnam, and everybody's in the military. So in other words, if Trump goes in there, you create a military debacle that you can't get out. What do you do? Fight there until you lose and leave? Or what do you do?
You fight there you do what we did in Afghanistan. You fight there and then you negotiate a pullout. You pull out, it's disaster, and you lose. And the government that you overthrew comes back to power just 20 years later with the whole country wrecked in terms of infrastructure, and with probably like another 1 million people dead. I mean, it's going to be even quicker than that. It wouldn't take 10 years to kick the U.S. out of Venezuela. All it'd take probably is a presidential term, if even that. I mean, it's such a horrific. And another thing that you have to consider, Garland, is the language thing. You see, in Iraq and in Afghanistan, you know, in Iraq, we were dealing with, you know, Arabs. Arabs, you know, to most Americans are foreign, unless you're from Dearborn, Michigan, or parts of like the, you know, Midwest. You know, it's a different language, different culture, and human beings intrinsically, unfortunately, don't really fear what they don't understand. And they were able during the Gulf War and the Iraq War, with 9/11, with all this Islamophobia, with, you know, this genuine, like, you know, chauvinism that was built up against Arab people and against Muslims. They were able to, you know, use that to their advantage against like U.S. troops by like creating a image of your enemy. Oh, your enemy wants to kill you. It wants to impose Sharia law. You know, you have maniacs in Texas, some stupid Texas lawmakers trying to run on the campaign of stop Sharia law. But in Venezuela, these are Spanish speakers. You know, go to your local school, go to your local store, go anywhere. You know, America, 25%, probably more than that, speak Spanish and English. And look at the people we're going to, like, it's assuming the U.S. invaded with the draft, and they'd have to draft like a huge amount of people. They'd have to draft a lot of those people being drafted would probably be Spanish speakers. How much of a morale problem is that going to create when, you know, these people are in the jungles, and some of them will be Venezuelan, like American descendant as well. These people that we sent out to the jungles to fight, and they're communicating with their own people. They're talking in Spanish with their own people. Can you imagine like not just the propaganda, but the psychological damage that's going to do, the amount of desertions that's going to happen, the fragging of officers, just like the complete mess it would create in the U.S. military, which has a lot of Spanish speaking people. It would be worse than Vietnam.
I don't think we get that far for this reason. The young people are not happy right now. You try to do a draft now? No. Ain't happening. You're going to get so many people that say, you're going to have to jail me. I'm not going to fight for this country. You're going to a lot of people. You're going to have gigantic detention camps for the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people that say, there's no way in hell you're going to start another one of these regime change wars, and I'm going to go to the jungles and get bit by a freaking snake, you know what I mean, and then slide off the side of a friggin' mountain in the jungle to fight for this. I don't know, you would have a revolt on your hands. And might I add this, MAGA would be pissed. The MAGA people are even like, hey, that ain't what we voted for. This would be a political debacle that I think would kind of end Trump's presidency.
Oh, no, absolutely. This would be, I mean, Trump in a lot of ways has already like really angered his base with the Epstein stuff, with the promising of pulling out and like, not intervening as much in US wars. People voted for that. A lot of people voted for that. A lot of independents voted for that. Trump didn't come to power in 2024 in that election with just his base. If he tried running for his base, he would have lost. The only reason he came to power is because he, apart from Biden being a very unpopular president and the Democrats, not having a fair primary, that's been an issue since 2016. It seems the Democrats can't allow a fair primary. You had, Trump built a coalition. He brought together, RFK Jr.'s people. He brought together Tulsi Gabbard's people. He went to the Libertarian Convention and spoke before the Libertarian Party, which is the third party. He brought together a political coalition in order to ride, the dissatisfaction with the Biden regime, what was going on in Gaza, the Ukraine conflict, the economic situation with Biden, all that. And he rode it to victory. And guess what? He's continuing everything that Biden, is doing. They were still sending weapons, money, and all sorts of signals intelligence to Ukraine. We're continuing that war. We're still allowing Bibi Netanyahu and the government of Israel to commit genocide against the people of Gaza and the Palestinians. We collaborated with them to help try and almost start a war with Iran, and now we're trying to get into Venezuela. I mean, it's just neoconservatism. The neocons have been in power. I have never known an American government that wasn't a neocon government. I was born in the early 2000s, post 9/11, and I've never lived under a non-neocon government.
Something I wanted to bring up. Oh, speaking of Ukraine. So now it seems to me, the rats are jumping off a sinking ship in Kiev, and old Zelensky's traipsing around, and now he ends up in Spain. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, he seems to be traveling a lot. Maybe he should get himself like a brochure of Europe, see all the sites. He can go to the Parthenon. He can go to he can go to all these beautiful places in Europe. If I were him, I wouldn't want to go back to Ukraine, not with the current stuff that's going on there. No, but it's funny that you mentioned Spain, Garland, because he actually was hanging out with the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, who's leader of the Socialist Party in Spain, socialist.
Yeah, they killed
him.
And
he took him across Madrid, and he took him to see the Prado, which is the museum that houses the Picasso's painting, the Guernica. That famous painting from the Spanish Civil War, where the fascists and Franco and the Germans bombed Guernica, and killed a ton of civilians. It was the first mass bombing, that we saw so far in the world against an urban target, and it just, there's images of this on Twitter now of him in front of Guernica with Zelensky. And it's so disgusting because, first off, Picasso was a Spanish communist. And Pedro Sanchez is supposedly a socialist. And both the socialist and the Communist Party in Ukraine under the Zelensky regime are in jail. They're in prison. They're tortured. Their activists are being murdered by neo-Nazi gangs on the streets, like almost on an everyday basis. So it was really funny looking on Twitter and seeing and reading the translations and also just the Spanish of like Spaniards who were saying to Pedro Sanchez, hey, this guy's a far right maniac who's in bed with a bunch of neo-Nazis and he's killing other socialists. What are you doing?
Your thoughts on that's something I want to throw at you. This business about the liberals. Here's what killed me. I remember when the stupidest thing ever, when Biden won whatever in 2020. I don't trust any of the elections. People are like, I think it was stolen in 2020. I don't trust any of the elections myself. I mean, they've got the machines and God only knows what's going to happen there. But the conservatives, yes, Venezuela and China and the socialists help Biden. And I'm like, Biden's trying to overthrow and attack and bomb and abuse every socialist government on earth. And I'm supposed to believe that they're going to help him, right? It's so stupid. I mean, to say that these people had no understanding of geopolitics and international ideology issues would be the understatement of the year, right? But
yeah, they really don't know anything.
But here's the thing about it. In recent years, there's been talks for years amongst different people, amongst what is it? You know, the Martin Luther King talking about the white liberal, right? Like over the course of time, whether it was Paul Robeson, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, at some point they would all come to the point, the idea, to the conclusion. You know, the white liberal is kind of a pain in the ass, right? You know, and ultimately you look now and you look at Europe, and you look at here, and you look at the Democratic Party, and you look at these social greens and crap like that, and it's like the liberals that call themselves lefties are the most fascist, totalitarian bastards you could ever get. They have been exposed that the liberals are just like totalitarians. Anyway, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, across Europe, I mean, you know, if you don't fit it within, there's a range of acceptable politics in Europe. You know, it's different from America. They have more parties over in Europe.
Yeah.
You have basically the acceptable political spectrum in Europe is social democrats and then conservatives, quote unquote. Now, you have to stay within this box, which means be pro-NATO, pro-EU. If you go outside that box from the left or from the right, well, you see, we get some funny things that happen with your elections. In Moldova, you know, for instance, the socialists and communists had a coalition party and they were going to win the Moldovan elections. And oh, would you look at that? You were 1%, 2% off. And we didn't allow any of the people, Moldovans who lived in Russia, who were citizens of Moldova, to vote. But we allowed all the Europeans to vote who were living in Berlin and Paris and all that. And then look what happened in Germany. With BSW and Sarah Wagenknecht and that left-wing populist party. Oh, you got 4.9 results. It wasn't enough to be 5% to get into the government and get into seats. Oh, that was so tragic. You know, it's really funny that like you know, the EU, you know, this organization that claimed like from its start that was built after the end of the Cold War, quote unquote, you know, it was built on liberty, freedom, democracy, and all these lovely sounding titles. But, you know, it gets to the point where it's just hilarious. You have, you know, a member of the Social Democrats sitting next to a guy who, you know, is in a government which is full of a bunch of people that burned socialists alive in Odessa back in 2014 at the trade union massacre, where 50, you know, Ukrainians, Russian-speaking Ukrainians, were defending, you know, the trade union house against the Maidan coup and all these neo-fascist skin-headed gangs. And they were trapped in the building and they were burned alive. Men, women, children. And, you know, there was a kid actually my age or younger, way younger than me. He was a 17-year-old named Vadim Pakura, who was member of the Ukrainian Komsomol, the communist youth in Ukraine. They burned him alive in the building. I mean, these are the type, like this is stuff that you read about when you read William Scherer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich that the brown shirts would do. And, you know, this has been going on. And these liberals will say, oh, this started in 2022 in February with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This was going on since 2013, 2014. And, you know, it's almost amazing. You know, it shows the restraint of the Russian government that they were even willing to like tolerate this for years upon years upon years, you know, from the trade union massacre to the Maidan Putsch to the war and shelling of Donbass and the people who were fighting against the putsch that happened. It's really just amazing, like, to see these liberals, these great supporters of democracy who are, you know, they're goose-stepping their way down the Brandenburg Gate, and they're goose-stepping their way in Brussels and in Paris and all across these European countries, because it's just asinine to me.
It really is. It's like they are totalitarian in that, you know, to me, it's harder to live in a totalitarian. That's the most difficult society to live in. Let's say somebody lives and there's a king or the dictator or whatever. You live in a society like that, right? Generally, there's rules. People know what you can do and what you can't do. In that liberal totalitarian society, it's like what they call the rules-based international order, right? They'll say you can do this, And then 6 weeks later, you'll get thrown off Twitter or punished for doing the same thing that you could do 6 weeks later. And then 6 weeks ago, for instance, you'll say, hey, I think COVID may have been made in a lab. Oh, that's it. You're screwed. You're done. Right. And then 6 months later, the government comes out and says, COVID was made in a lab. But if I said that, I was screwed. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's just an example. There's so many things that basically in the liberal totalitarian society, they're arbitrary and capricious. It's like arbitrarily application of the law instead of rule of law. People can be comfortable if they know what the rules are. Right. I can do this. I can't do that. I'll get in trouble if I do this. Even if they're not happy with it, that's not what we want, of course. But if people say, I know where the guardrails are, I know what the third rail is, I can live my life.
Right.
But if you don't know what you're going to do, what you may do that get yourself in trouble, and the things that you do now that are fine, next week they get you in trouble. Or they come out and they say, you donated money to whatever. And you're like, yeah, it was perfectly legal. Well, it's not legal now. So ex post facto, right, you're going to get in trouble for it. What you did that wasn't illegal when you did it. That's the thing about the whole liberal thing. It is arbitrary and capricious, and it's totalitarian, and it's like getting blatantly obvious. And you're telling me that the right wing's a bunch of fascists, and you're aligned with guys who are running around with the Hitler tattoos all over them, telling me the Azov battalion is good, and you're changing your rules every 6 weeks.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really makes you think, because, and you also notice this, and also in terms of like the rule of law, I think a lot of this can be rooted in if you look at the age of imperialism. Lenin wrote a very good book named Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism.
Right.
And he writes that this is what happens in imperial core, nations that aren't colonized, that are imperial powers doing the colonizing. The working class of these nations, yes, a strata of them will benefit from the proceeds of imperialism. Not all of them will benefit, though. And in a lot of cases, their living standards will go down, and as their living standards go down, and as imperialism results in contradictions and wars and market failure and stuff like that, repeatedly, the principles of the French Revolution, of modern bourgeois liberalism, they fly out the window. The idea that, freedom of speech. Well, you said something you didn't like, that flew out the window. Look what happened in this country look what happened during this country and during McCarthyism. I mean, members of the Communist Party, they were thrown in jail for like 5-10 years for what? Oh, you said something in a book or in a pamphlet that advocated socialism, communism. Then they demonstrated in court, yeah, that's illegal under the First Amendment. Oh, no. You were teaching an ideology. And this is how they imprisoned them. This is how they imprisoned the leadership of the Communist Party at the Foley Square trial back in, I believe, 1947-48. They imprisoned them on the fact that they were promoting an ideology that would lead an individual to the conclusion that the government had to be overthrown. So for that reason, we're going to throw you on jail for 5-10 years. I mean, they tortured people. Henry Winston lost his eyesight in prison. Paul Robeson was poisoned by the CIA. They dosed, I don't know what the hell they dosed with them with. They were running all sorts of crazy stuff during MK Ultra. They imprisoned people who were in the U.S. Army and were fighting during World War II. Robert G. Thompson, who was the winner of the Distinguished Service Cross, who served in the Pacific War, who fought the Japanese. He won the Distinguished Service Cross, which is a cross it's like below in stature of the Medal of Honor, but it's like a really high up there. He ran out. He finished his service. He was a captain in the U.S. Army. He came back home. He ran for office as a communist in New York, and they threw him in prison for like 5 to 10 years. And to give the cake on it, this American who was ran for office at one point, despite his service record in the U.S. Army, there was a whole battle to bury him in Arlington National Cemetery, which you can see his grave today. They did bury him eventually, but there was a political battle just to bury this American who fought in World War II in service of the United States. But because he was a communist and this was the Cold War, they didn't want to bury him in Arlington Cemetery. And they buried an SS man in Arlington Cemetery. God, what's his name? It's either Leo Thorne, who was a Finnish guy who fought in the Finnish Soviet War, fought with the SS in World War II, and then somehow got to America and he became a special operations guy in Vietnam, and he died in Vietnam. His helicopter got shot down. Larry Thorne, he's buried in Arlington Cemetery, and there were no problems with that. But there was a problem when, you know, an American was, you know, had politics, and they didn't want to bury him.
If you remember Paul Robeson, they brought him before the House Un-American Affairs Committee.
Yep.
And they said, are you and now here's the other thing about Paul Robeson. He never belonged to any political party. When people asked him, they said, are you a communist or a socialist? He would say, I advocate for socialism. That's what he would say. But he never belonged to any party, right? And when they brought him before Congress, they said, are you a communist? He said, I don't have to answer that question. Right. He said the Constitution says I could be if I wanted to, but you don't even have a right to ask me that question. I don't have to answer any questions like that. I'm an American citizen, and I don't have to tell you by law. I don't have to tell you what party that I belong to, and if I wanted to be a member of that party, I could. He wasn't. Right. He just said he advocated for socialism, but he decided to never become a member of a party. But it didn't matter, because at the time they didn't like what he was saying, and so he was punished without trial, basically. And before they even poisoned him and all. And so here we sit, where we got people running around with Zionism, saying, okay, well, if you we've got now, what is it? Larry Ellison bought Paramount. And he's got a list of actors and actresses in Hollywood who signed the letter against the genocide and who are opposed to various things that the U.S. is doing. And they're like, okay, that's it. These people are black. We're back to a point where Hollywood is blacklisting people because they don't agree with U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah, no, it's unbelievable. Norman, if you listen to Norman Finkelstein and the interviews that he does, and he's a descendant of Holocaust survivors, and he's an anti-Zionist, and he's an academic who was run out of academia for his beliefs. He says it's worse than McCarthyism, and I'm inclined to agree with him. Look what happened to these presidents at these universities, who barely said anything. And these people aren't Palestine activists. A lot of these people don't even support establishing a two-state solution, which is like a bare liberal minimum demand. And they were run out of town because all they did was say, you don't have a right to kick people out of campus and off of college for advocating, and speaking their First Amendment rights about a foreign nation, which is not part of the U.S., that is committing a genocide. And they ran these people out of academia. You have the Canary Mission out there who's putting students up there left and right. It is utterly insane what's going on at the domestic political level. And then you have the whole Epstein files, which is a whole other can of worms, where you have Ghislaine Maxwell and her father, Robert Maxwell, who was a Mossad agent and was literally, I think, the head of Mossad went to his funeral when Robert Maxwell died. And you have just a situation in the United States where the First Amendment is being thrown overboard completely. Any notion of the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, I mean, in a lot of ways, they're just suggestions, both historically and to the present day. But they've just gone to the wind, all in service of this insane ideology, Zionism, that demands the extermination of the Palestinian people and is covering for a genocide.
Well, I noticed, because I do a radio show and I do get callers. And the thing I noticed, because we get a lot of the liberals, right? Right. And I will say to them, I say, you guys don't get mad at the people that's lying to you. You get mad at the guy who tells you that you're being lied to. Isn't that the way it works? And basically, and I'll say, do you realize you and I are having an argument? You're telling me Putin is a dictator, and I'm like, well, the evidence does not point to that. Oh, the Ukraine is just a plucky democracy standing up against dictator, and I'm like, the evidence doesn't point to that, and they're a bunch of friggin' fascists, and I will give you, and I present the evidence. And at some point, I'll say, do you understand what this argument is about? Here's the argument. You're telling me the official CIA, U.S. State Department, U.S. government story is true, and I'm saying to you, no, it's all lies. And it's like, where are you politically? If you're arguing that the CIA, you're arguing with somebody and somebody said, the CIA story is a lie. And you're going no, it's not. The CIA is telling you the truth. That's where liberalism is now. Liberalism in America is the gatekeepers for the official CIA, State Department, U.S. imperial warmongering neocon story. They're the gatekeepers to tell you it's all right. And that those of us who say, well, that's all lies. I don't know what we are. We're Putin bots or whatever the hell. But that's what liberalism is today.
No, we're everything. We're communists. We're illiberals. We're populists. We're agents of influence. I will say, for all the free work that liberals will accuse us of being Putin bots, I haven't got my check.
You're right.
I guess Vladimir just is late on the mail these days. But no, it's a sign of the current times, and it is very reminiscent of like earlier trends in the night. Where liberalism in other past countries very quickly descends into fascism. All it takes is an economic collapse, a strong working class movement, and conditions where the capitalists are so scared that they give a lot of money to a bunch of maniacs, and the maniacs come to power, and they do exactly what the imperial system and this classical liberalism wants. They crush the left, they protect the free market capitalist system, and they serve empire and serve wars. So the fascists are, in a way, the tools of the ruling class and of the ruling system. It's so interesting because liberalism and liberalism, quote unquote, in its modern day form looks nothing like the revolutionary liberalism of the French Revolution, the 1848 spring of Europe and stuff like that. It looks nothing like that. Liberalism has been decayed so much by capitalism and finance capital and this current monopoly capitalist stage we're in right now, that it's basically just become the only liberalism there is the liberalism of the market. Everything else doesn't matter. Free speech doesn't matter. The ability to organize trade unions doesn't matter. The holding fair elections certainly doesn't matter. For God's sakes, look at the Democratic primary in 2016, 2020. I mean, so it's liberalism has basically become inverted fascism and totalitarianism, when it becomes threatened, it just becomes open in totalitarianism and fascism.
And liberalism now is not a political ideology. It's a moral ideology, right? So now I'm liberal, so I am morally correct. And you, sir, disagree with me, so you are automatically immoral. And that justifies anything I do to you. If I say you should be thrown off of whatever, you should be deplatformed, you should lose your job, everything should happen to you. Why? Because you're immoral. And when I ask a question, what is a woman? Well, what I'm saying is I have the moral answer and you have an immoral answer. If you disagree with anyone who disagrees with me, I have an official liberal answer for what is a woman supposed to mean, right? When people ask me, I say it's a noun. That's the answer. That's the correct answer. But the reality is that no matter what it is, if it's something to do with the LGBTQ plus or whatever, which like most modern people today are like, I don't give a shit about that stuff. I don't care about people. That's people's lives. Let consenting adults live their lives the way they choose. It's none of my business. I don't have anything against them. Just go, everybody, let's live our lives and be happy and leave people alone, right?
Right.
But the liberals have weaponized that kind of stuff. So now they're looking for some way, whether it's that or it's the conservatives used to use this family values term and they would weaponize it. You know what I mean? Family values, and they'd weaponize it to attack anybody and say, you're not family values. Now the liberals are like LGBTQ plus or indigenous black people of color that I stand up for. So now they take that and they weaponize that we're the moral people because we stand up for whatever it is. Right. But now they've become the moral Nazis. So that gives them a right to attack you because you don't believe women or you don't agree with them on some issue. And it's not a political ideology. The fact that it's a moral ideology, it's almost like the Crusades. Right. I'm so moral that if you disagree with me, I can plunge a sword into your heart. That's where the liberals are.
Yeah. No, and I mean, look what has happened, like, not just in terms of America. I mean, for God's sakes, and like, again, I keep saying it ad nauseum, in Europe, it's just gotten utterly insane. If you're running on like any kind of a peaceful platform, if you're running, there's a guy who ran in Moldova, Georgescu or whatever his name is. There's a lot that I don't like about him in terms of like his, like, he has a very like, right-wing kind of politics and, but besides that, he runs an election. It looks like he's going to win. And Romania and the EU, they get the call and they ban him. They ban him from the ballot up, and we got to rework the election. And, you know, what do you know? The pro-EU, beautiful rainbow sunshine, European Union from Brussels, their candidate wins. How magical. And
they charged him with a crime. Remember?
Yeah, they did.
And same with what's her name in France. Now it's got to the point where if you're running, I mean, how fascist can you get? Somebody runs for office. Well, looks like old Max Reed's going to win. Oh, it does, do you? Yeah, okay, we'll handle that. Go lock him up. What we're charging him with, I don't know, exposing himself to a blind person. Good enough. Take him away. That's where they are, to the point where they literally charge you with a crime if they think you're going to win. And and they're defending democracy.
Yeah. No. And now it looks like, you know, in the name of this global liberalism, the neocons are going to embark on another regime change war, and not just Venezuela, but there's murmurs about Cuba. They are desperate to destroy Cuba. I mean, my God, they've lobbed everything at this poor country that's like suffered. You know, Cuba has lost $1 billion, not $1 billion, $1 trillion thanks to the U.S. blockade since the 1960s. I mean, it's absolutely completely immoral, completely insane, regardless of like ideological stuff. Yet they are just so desperate not to have any country that has an alternative development model, be it socialism, Bolivarianism, communism, Baathism. It doesn't matter what ism. If you have an alternative model that isn't fascism and isn't capitalism, then the global empire is going to go after you. You know,
that's a fact. It's madness, and that is what that's what liberalism has become. It's become a total. It is, well, no, excuse me. It has been exposed for what it really is.
Yes.
You know, it's like, okay, it's going to pretend to be nice and fuzzy until you push against it. Yes. And as soon as you push against it, it turns into what it really is. And here's the good old Washington Post. You know, they stand against all things right wing and conservative.
Stands for democracy and darkness.
Hamas is refusing to disarm. Repairing Gaza can't happen until the terrorist group no longer holds sway. Was it the terrorist group that bombed the hell out of it? Look at this. I don't think Hamas did that. The terrorist group. We must stop. Look at this. This was done by the U.S. empire and its proxy, its Zionist proxy, and they're saying that Hamas has to be dealt with because, I mean, we just can't have peace. Look what's happened around. No, wait a minute. They didn't do it. Never mind. It's madness. But anyway, Max Reed, thanks a lot. Tell everybody where they can find your Substack and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you can find my Substack at Max Reed 1917 on Substack. I'm just getting started, journalist, amateur historian, political analyst, whatever you want to call me. And that's where you can find the article I wrote, which came out called Narcos versus Neocons. There's a lot of information you've heard.
Let me see if I can find it. Max. There we go. I'll let people get a peep at it just before we go. How about that? Let me share that. Max Reed Substack is right here. Voila. Max Reed, American patriot, anti-imperialist historian. There we go. Narcos, Neocons and Narcos. So look at that. Oh, for God's sake. All right. Thanks a lot, Max. Everybody, thank you for all of the good work you're doing out there. Thanks, everybody, for supporting me. And thank you very much to those who have donated on, you know, and our Patreon members. You can donate on Buy Me a Coffee and Cash App and PayPal, all that stuff. And, of course, there's my P.O. Box. If you want to send me. Somebody just sent me. Where's the book I just said? I just had a book, and if you heard of it, but I don't see the darn book. Oh, crap. Of course, I'll find it as soon as it was called Taking Something or Other. But people send me books all the time. But anyway, whatever the case may be, thanks a lot, everybody, for sending me stuff. And have a great day. And don't forget the most important thing, you guys out there in the chat and everybody that's watching, the great thing that you can do to further alternative media is share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.